All right, episode 10.
Here we are.
How many properties do we need, Joey? This is a good one because again, we see so much marketing out there, and there's so many different ways to kind of skin a cat and look at building out a portfolio. And I think when I first started getting into property and reading all the books, it started at about 250 is what I needed. Then I got sold the dream of 10 properties in 10 years and sell half and pay off the rest of the debt. But as we've talked about, that strategy doesn't necessarily work too well these days. But what is the actual number? What are we aiming? How many properties do we think we need?
Well, I mean, obviously, like we said, it's really circumstantial, and it really comes down to what are the goals, what are we actually trying to achieve? Because understanding what that end goal looks like, maybe putting a number against that, you can potentially then reverse engineer that back to where you currently are. You may already have an asset, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is, and then you can hopefully then figure out how many additional acquisitions that you need to get to that end goal. Usually, and obviously it's a rough rule of thumb, but I mean, if your goals are maybe somewhere between maybe $100 to $150,000 worth of passive income, kind of no more than between 3 and 5, obviously depending on the purchase prices and whatever else of the assets. But if you're kind of talking about standard kind of acquisitions, I'm usually not seeing the need for many more than that. You?
Yeah. Two to 5 really is where most people kind of sit, depending on rent vesting, principal place of residence, all that type of stuff. And at the end of the day, all you really want to do is just reverse engineer that ideal number, right? So if you're talking about 150K worth of passive income, let's say just to make the maths really, really simple, we can find a commercial property on a 10% rental yield. What does that get us? It's a $1.5 million commercial property, right? That's one property.
One asset could get you there.
And look, you can't, if you're a 22-year-old and looking to buy a $1.5 million commercial property, you're not probably going to be able to do it right now. But that's
probably
why
not fine with the 10% rental yield either. But
well, let's say two at 5. Being significant.
Yeah.
That's $3 million worth of assets, right?
Yeah.
That's being quite conservative. So if $3 million is your mark and your borrowing capacity is only at about, if you think about the household income, it's about 92 grand, or it was a couple of years ago.
So it's 200.
Say it's 200. So you could probably borrow 6 is about 1.2, between 1.2 and 1.4 is probably what most people can afford to buy, which means your portfolio is going to be around 1.5, 1.6 mil. So if that's kind of where we're capped, that's kind of where we're starting. That's why we say it's about 2 to 5 properties, because we see most people max out at about 2 or 3 purchases from a typical lending standpoint. Then we allow time to do its thing. We allow that compounding to come into play. The values of our property increase, over a good market cycle, they may double in price. So then our portfolio is going from 1.6 to 3.2.
Yep.
That allows us, with some income growth and everything else like that, to increase our borrowing capacity a little bit. We may be able to refinance, pull out some borrowable equity. Then we might have, 300 to 500 to 600K worth of a deposit. And that is enough for us to then get into that commercial property, which is outside the typical lending standpoint. And it might be 1 or 2 of those commercial properties, totaling a maximum of 5 properties, to be able to get to that kind of range of about $3 million worth of assets. And then again, we move through our different phases of building out a portfolio and go through consolidation, making sure the properties that we bought initially are still serving a purpose in terms of what we want, letting the momentum and the cash flow properties do their thing, let rents increase over time, and hitting that kind of long-term goal. But
so these are our kind of our own thoughts and philosophies, right? Like, you might go out there and buy those lower price point, higher cash flowing properties, and maybe you've got 10, and maybe 10 gives you your $200,000 goal that you're chasing. So we definitely don't want to say that there is no other way other than this, but that's just what we kind of resonate with, why it gives us that really nice rounded portfolio like you were mentioning there. We've got a foothold in that kind of resi space that hopefully gives us that kind of long-term consistent growth, a foothold in some of that kind of momentum cash flowing property, and then in the higher yielding asset, maybe it's the commercial property towards the back end of the portfolio.
Yeah. I think if most people are capped at about 1.4 though, and the total portfolio value is like 1.6 to 1.8, you try and split that into 10, you look at 180K.
Yeah.
Would I personally go out and buy a 180K property? Probably not.
Probably not.
So, there are definitely ways to do it. We've seen people that are super successful at that lower range. It definitely can be done. It just comes down to, again, like, what is your strategy? What are you comfortable with? What do you want to go and execute on? If you have a really active strategy and you want to be in these properties doing renovations, fixing them out, putting grading flats on, increasing the yield, like that price range, you might be happy to fly out to a regional center and really do some due diligence and analysis on these things, and then be super active and do a renovate and flip or or a renovate and hold. Take them from 180 to 300. You've essentially doubled your money, increased the rent, and you've got that good cash flow coming through. It's definitely a way to do it. I don't know if at the 180 mark, there's probably too much in the country that you probably get at. But I think you kind of get the gist.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like it's really, really important to understand, like coming back to kind of ep 1 and 2 where we spoke about really understanding the why and really understanding what your goals are and getting that like kind of buy-in, the alignment from a household perspective, because that would ultimately dictate what we're reverse engineering back towards. Because if you got that number fundamentally wrong from the outset and say, oh, I want $300,000 worth of passive income because that sounds really nice, even though I might only need 120, well, then you're automatically kind of realigning, because it does fundamentally change what you would need to acquire during your accumulation phase. So really important to understand what your goals are, why they are your goals, what does that actually allow you to do in said retirement, and then that way we get really crystal clear around what the end outcome is so that we can build the right type of plan to get there.
Yeah. And there's so many ways to skin the cat. And that's what all we're saying is like, you know, we don't want you to start on that journey of buying the lower quality type asset. Not that they're lower quality, but lower value type assets. Get 2 or 3 of them, and they're actually, you know what? They're a bit of annoying tenants, like steering my head in. I don't want to know that I want 6 or 10 of these. I just want one really good one, and then realize that the strategy that you've put in place isn't necessarily going to work for you long term, and have to reverse engineer or undo some of the bad mistakes or things that you've done along the journey.
Yeah, I think that we can comfortably say that we don't need 156 or 289 or whatever it is in 15 minutes, and we don't expect to acquire them all over the next 2 years. Like you see some people say, oh, I want to buy like 8 properties in the next 4 months. Well, hang on, do you have like a $2 million deposit and unlimited borrowing capacity? Because otherwise, for most people, it is going to take time. And like we're only just chatting before that, like the overall kind of consensus would be that, like, as particularly as you're starting out, like the first kind of tranche there, maybe it's the first decade or whatever it is, generally sucks from a cash flow perspective. And maybe it's taking a little bit of time for the market to move. You've read about all this kind of growth, and it might start to take you maybe 2-3 years to see that materialize. And then as you kind of get into that next decade, which is kind of where we're sitting at now, where the portfolio becomes kind of self-sufficient, you've had some time for growth, you've seen some potential doubling of value across some of the assets in the portfolio, the negative cash flow isn't as bad as what it was 9 years ago. And then it's the kind of that last phase there where you're then starting to live off the retirement dollars. Not that, I mean, there are plenty of other ways that you can kind of chop and change that in between, but there is going to be a period there that might be a harder slog.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, you know, a big part of what we want to do next moving forward with the podcast is interview all of the people that have large portfolios, have done it different ways, have been able to do the low value ones, and they've got 20 or 30 in their portfolio, or they might have just bought one really solid property and it's, you know, tripled in value in the last 7 years for, I don't know if we can find it, but maybe we will, you know, and it's done really well and it's served their purpose. Maybe they've been able to exit and get into the commercial. Like, we want to talk to everyone that has done something different, has had a unique approach, has done it in a different way. Maybe they've done it in a different order, and include everything like developments, subdivisions, renovations, anything we can possibly think of. Interview their stories, interview how they look at building a portfolio, the different philosophies and everything else like that.
Just to give like you guys as much context and information to, like, I think we said in Ep 1, like to grab the parts that resonate with you the most and kind of say, yeah, that sounds like me, or that sounds like a strategy that I would be comfortable to employ, not just necessarily because a couple of blokes here said that that's what they would personally do.
And we want to give you the lens and the reality of what they've been able to do as well. A lot of people who have very successful and large portfolios have generally had some sort of large income that's enabled them to get into the 20, the 30, the 40, the $50 million portfolios. They've been able to fund it from a business or from somewhere else, maybe it's an inheritance or something like that, to be able to do it. And so we want to give you the lens from start to finish of where everyone's come from, how they've been able to do it, why they've been able to do a portfolio, but also give you some really good context around, well, what are the other factors in their life that has allowed them to build out that portfolio? How did they start? At what point did they go, okay, now I'm capped on borrowing capacity, maybe I need to increase my income, and how do they approach it? And just be able to give you, you know, even if you are just earning 100 grand a year, what is the best way that you could potentially start to build out that portfolio, get that first foot in the door, start to get leverage, not even 100, might be 60 grand a year, whatever the number is. How do you get your first foot in the door and then build your way out to building up that portfolio.
Yeah, and I suppose like, as we start to bring some of these guests onto the podcast, you'll hear that most people go through a pretty similar story as well, right? You get kind of excited, you go down the investing route, and then you get caught. And we'll probably hear that most of the guests that we bring on will probably have a story around borrowing capacity and having got capped at a particular point. And also another really important one is goal change. As careers change, as they start businesses, become a little bit more successful, maybe the goalposts move, maybe family formation. So lots of the topics that we've discussed in these previous podcasts hopefully will come to light as we start to bring these guests on board.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. It's going to be good to listen to all of them. So as a bit of a kind of a recap of everything that we've touched on in the first 10 episodes, essentially, really just wanted to give you a breakdown at the start of this podcast series of all the things that we should think about when it comes to strategy before we get into specific in conversations. But the first episode, we covered why strategy matters.
Yeah, and I think really, really important. I honestly wanted to just double down in on why that is so critically important, because understanding that there are so many different strategies, one, realizing which one kind of aligns with you the most is also really, really important, but then overall kind of figuring out a play to get there. So I know we kind of touched on it a couple of seconds ago, but figuring out what the end goal is, reversing that back to today is critically important, because if you get that end piece wrong, then your foundations are going to be miles apart.
Yeah, and if you get one purchase wrong that you haven't got a plan set towards, it could derail the strategy for 5 years, 10 years. And so you just want to make sure that every purchase that you're making is on the right trajectory to help you get where you need to go.
Yeah, and so we said next up after that, we kind of were focusing in on goal setting, getting people kind of in alignment, understanding what the goal is, not just kind of picking an arbitrary figure or something, a goal that someone has told you, but just really understanding what that is, that it's personal to you.
Yeah, and being realistic around it as well. As we said back in that episode, it's most people have this goal of 100 grand or 150 grand, but they don't actually need that amount. It's really figuring out, it could be 86 grand, it could be, it could be 120 grand until, super can come across. And then we've got enough in super to allow us to keep going. Be realistic with what that goal is. Don't just throw out a number and go, this is what I need. Don't just try and replace your current income, because your current circumstances and the financial situation that you're going through now might not be what you need when you're older as well. Now, with all these numbers, we inflation adjust them out. So if you just say $86,000 today, given that the kids aren't in private school anymore and we're going on, cruise-your holidays rather than these lavish holidays, will inflation adjust that? It'll still be 86, maybe with inflation, 160 or whatever it might be, but it's a more realistic number around what you need in retirement. And hopefully we can save you from having to be forced to pay for another 1 or 2 properties and pay that mortgage down for another,
if you don't need to,
5 to 10 years if you don't need to.
And we've seen that before as well, right? Where you come in, we've done some modeling there, and adding another property into the portfolio is actually delayed the time to actually get to that desired retirement target, because you're adding in another property at maybe 80 or 106% LVR with a 6% interest rate and a 4% rent to it. It's actually pushing the goalposts a little bit further away from you, depending on the circumstances.
It's actually you're right. It's quite funny to see that. Sometimes when we, have like a 15-year buying window and we're accumulating assets, maybe do the third, the fourth, the fifth, as we start to add in more, it's actually not impacting the retirement goal
as you think it would
in a better format. You're kind of like, we're buying another property. This should get us closer to the goal. But the thing is that 15 years of buying, you're now only 8 years away from when you said that you wanted to retire. And if you're buying another property, then you're adding more debt to the portfolio, and that 8 years is enough time to potentially pay it off. So, there is this kind of juggling or balancing act of when do we time these acquisitions in a close enough window so that we do have time for the consolidation and debt reduction phase to eventually be able to execute on that exit strategy.
Yeah, and it comes back to, again, how much is enough? We also kind of covered off the kind of the main kind of cash flow versus growth play there. Obviously, we didn't kind of delve into it like a great debate like we have done in past podcasts, but obviously kind of talking about the difference there in terms of focusing on the growth early up front and then maybe transitioning towards cash flow, or purely a growth portfolio versus purely a high yielding portfolio. And then that kind of really nice potential balance there of having both in the portfolio and not necessarily saying you have to wear one cap and only one cap.
Yeah, and I think the goal with that episode was just if you're listening to individuals that are really heavily in one camp or the other, and you're kind of on this hurrah of this is the only way to do it. We just wanted to open mindsets to be doesn't have to be one way or the other. Really, most people have a good mixed portfolio. It's okay to be in one camp and know that that's your strategy and that's what you want to execute on, but it's not the be all and end all to be in one or the other.
Yeah, definitely. And the other kind of play there is all about the value add. So we focused, and I know you kind of touched on it a sec ago as well, but we focused in on some of those value add plays. So like the granny flat development, subdivision, just the normal standard kind of cosmetic or structural renovation to a property, the property flipping piece. So there was a few kind of little moving parts in there in terms of ways to add value to the portfolio, but then we also kind of weighed up whether or not, like, what kind of investor are you? Are you a passive investor or are you a more active one? Obviously, all of these approaches requires you, well, not necessarily requires you to get on the tools, but requires someone to get on the tools and isn't as standoffish as what you and I both like property investing to be.
And it could be a season, right? You might, as we said, you could have, you could be cash poor up front, right? So you might have to get into that first property and actually do the renovation or the subdivision or whatever it might be, add value to that asset, increase the value, and that unlocks some equity for you that allows you to go into property number 2 and property number 3. So we're just giving you some good ideas around if you're just starting out and building portfolio and you get capped by one of the 3 things, which is either cash flow, or what was that?
Borrowing capacity.
Borrowing capacity. The main thing we've been talking about this whole time. If you're capped by one of those 3 things, what are some ways that you can get around it and keep building out the portfolio?
And then we kind of moved on, and I might kind of bundle these ones in together, where we spoke about finances and money management in general. Now, finance is such a huge part of building out a portfolio, and it's something that we really need to understand upfront and kind of know where your roadblocks might come into. And for most people, like we said, that's probably going to be borrowing capacity, or in some instances, it's maybe the deposit that is the shortfall, which kind of ties into the money management piece. Did you want to kind of double down in terms of some of those podcast episodes there?
No, I think the finance is probably the main one. As I said, property is a game of finance, and so really locking down your finance play is probably the most important thing you can do. Again, work with a investment savvy broker who can help you set up your finance and structure your finance properly so that it's helping you over the long term, and then you're working with the right people who are on your team to help you move forward. And I do that from the start because it's not impossible to undo bad financial setups, but it does take time. You got to go through refinancing docs and loans, and it can take time within the portfolio. And if it's not structured correctly from the start, it could prevent you from buying that second or third property.
Yeah, absolutely. And like even one term, like piece of terminology, like cross collateralization and like crossing the security there of particular assets can be quite a difficult thing to undo. So it can take a lot of time, and the banks will be pushing that agenda because they want you to cross secure properties against each other. It gives them kind of more fat, makes you a little bit more stickier to them as a customer, but it can cause you some headaches moving forward as well. So just really question. It could serve in some instances there. It maybe means that it's the only way to qualify for finance. Maybe it's the only way to service. Maybe it means you go to a lender where you get a whole bunch more borrowing capacity. There are kind of reasons and seasons where that might make sense. But for the most part, especially for those kind of younger investors, and this happened to me as well with the property number 2, where I'm not going to say that the bank kind of took advantage of the situation, but definitely didn't tell me all the pros and the cons of cross-securing loans at the time, and it took me a while to undo those.
Yeah, right. Did you have to? Was it a big process to undo it all?
Yeah, I took years of kind of needing to get to a point where the servicing was good enough, the LVRs were good enough against each of the assets that you could
separate them out.
Yeah, right. Obviously, that's going to be different for each individual person there, but not as straightforward as.
So just be aware that it exists. Avoid it if you potentially can, but if you need to refinance to be able to get access to equity, and it's the only way, it might work in your favor. Then we moved on to the different phases of building out a portfolio. So a lot of what we talked about at the front was just the acquisition stage, being able to accumulate these properties, setting up the finance right, types of assets we look out for, what we're looking to buy out for when we're building the portfolio. Then we moved into phase 2, which is consolidation. And this was all just about making sure that the properties are performing the way that we expected. They're serving the purpose in the portfolio. If our strategy has changed or what we want out of the portfolio has changed, each of those properties are still valid and relevant and what we want in our portfolio in terms of the best use of our borrowing capacity. Number 3, we moved on to debt stabilization. So making sure if we're going interest only that we're refinancing at least every 5 years, making sure that the loan that we're getting in is, a decent rate with a good economy that we're looking to take advantage of. Just making sure that our, offset accounts are allocated properly, especially if we've got a principal place of residence, and tax deductible debt versus non-tax deductible debt, potentially using, touching on it in the next one, but the money management with a credit card and making sure that's being paid correctly and everything else like that. And then the final phase is retiring, like exit strategies. So getting out of the properties that we acquired. What are the best ways to exit out of them? What are the different things that might come into play that we haven't even thought about, like super, inheritance, and all that sort of stuff. Now, obviously, you got to think about all the tax complications of when that happens as well. If we're triggering off sales, there's going to be CGT tax and everything else like that. So we want to kind of factor that in and think about that over the long term. But how are we actually going to get out of this portfolio, and what do we want the portfolio to look like when we are essentially finished?
Yep. And not necessarily getting out of, but also retiring out debt. So not that we have to exit every single property, but more that kind of debt retirement play, which might come as a result of helping sell some properties to get us to that particular point in through there. But we also kind of, I think there was a second last step there that we kind of really dived into the money management piece. And I really love this one in particular because it comes back to the planning again, like in the forecasting. Obviously, you're never going to nail this, but it's really important that you do put some of those kind of big life milestones out there on the table, right?
Because they happen, right? Like life, you want to live life.
Yeah.
You don't want to save every single penny.
And not even that, like just family formation happen. Kind of weddings generally usually happen. Children usually happen. These are kind of things that you just want to be planning for. And even like that example that we gave in the previous pod there, where we're talking about, okay, if you are planning on having a child in whatever, 2-3 years, well, maybe it's your time to make an acquisition now or 2 acquisitions now before we lose an income, and then understanding the cash flow ramifications. Okay, when we lose an income, well, we've lost an income. Do we have the cash flow balances on hand to be able to carry the portfolio through that period?
Yeah, and what if we want to buy a car in that period, or if we want saving for another deposit, but we really want to go on that 50 grand European holiday, like factoring all these things in and just making really, really good decisions around it all. One thing that we didn't cover in that episode, I think we should touch on, is just buckets as well, like being able to bucket your money into separate categories. I know we touched on like allocating whatever you can, 10, 20, 30% towards your savings. The higher that number, the better that's going to be. But there's a whole breakdown of budgets that we should be able to do as well in terms of, how much are our expenses, how much we're going to spend on lifestyle, how much is discretionary spending, and then, we want to really try and save the rest. But I think that could probably be an entire episode in itself as well. But just really thinking about what we're doing with our money, what are the big expenses that could come up that we're not factoring in, and how does that all navigate and circumvent around the portfolio?
And then one of my favorite ones, because I think that there's just so much kind of hype in and around at the moment, is that whole, do you rent vest or do you go out there and buy the principal place of residence? And again, it's like kind of that cash flow versus growth thing. You have to be in one camp and one camp only. And how dare you ever look at the pros when you are, or look at the cons of one. And do you know what I mean? Like, you have to be just religious to one particular camp, when I just don't think it's the case, because I can see the benefits and I can see the downsides of both of those. And while one suited me at one point, it doesn't suit me anymore, and it might change again in 5 years' time.
Exactly, spot on. And we go through different economies and different interest rates, everything else like that. Everything moves up and down. So just maybe don't take an emotional picture of it, but just see what an emotional element is going to impact, and then make a decision based on what you want to do. Is the family more comfortable sitting at home in their own house and being able to do whatever they want to the house, or do the lifestyle component and be able to move and have flexibility and live where you want to live while investing in other assets as well? And then the final episode that we wrapped up was just not making some mistakes that we have seen day in and day out, and the commonalities between that. Some of the things that we mentioned in there was just house and land estates, off the plan apartments, mining towns,
or boom and bust towns,
lifestyle or holiday house kind of purchases, looking outside of your own backyard, so not listening to Uncle Barry at the barbecue and buying around the corner, and then just having the right people in your team.
Yeah, the right team, really, really important. So after all this, I'm not sure, did we cover it? How many properties do we actually need in the portfolio? Did you end up telling me how many I need?
It was about 2 to 5. That's my personal opinion. We've seen many people with much more properties be super successful and be able to retire out that debt.
I think that the most surprising thing that we kind of see people like the look on their face when they kind of come through and as they're starting to plan this stuff out, to most often, or more often than not, people are actually surprised with how fewer assets they usually need. People generally think that, oh wow, I actually thought I needed 10. Or even you can see it in like the client entered data. You go, well, okay, if you put in your target of X, how many properties do you think you actually need to get there? And in most instances, it's probably double digits. When you kind of go, well, you're not going to need that many, obviously depending on the purchase price, but you're probably not going to need as many properties in your portfolio as you think. And is it good to do that? Like, what are some of the downfalls of holding that many properties in the portfolio? Like, more assets is more headaches. I know we said it before, like more tenants is, I think more properties is more complaining tenants, more hot water systems, more aircon units, things that could potentially go wrong. I mean, I personally would rather hold fewer really good quality assets than many less inferior assets, but like you've got like a really impressive portfolio of 50 properties and look at me, I'm a property mogul. Doesn't really resonate with me. You?
Yep. 100%. I'm agreeing totally on the same page. And it shifts over time as well. Like right now, I'm probably more comfortable with one or two really good commercial assets and not even do on the residential side. But that's because I have been through those phases. I've built the wealth on the residential side. I've been able to build a portfolio to where it is today. And now I'm on the other side of like, okay, it's time to just have the cash flow come in and enjoy it from that side of things as well. So I guess what we're saying with all of this is it's okay to go through different phases of the portfolio and what you want out of your portfolio long-term big picture. Know where you're going to start. Like I know we haven't really badgered the low quality of properties, but we've said some of the cons or reasons of why. But if that's where you can only start, then that's where you can only start. It's going to get your foot in the door. You're going to have your first property. You're probably going to have a high yield, which is probably going to be beneficial. And, hopefully you can leverage off some growth on that first one to get into the second and third. Does that mean, even though we said you only need 2 to 5 properties and don't buy bad quality properties, does that mean that, it can't be a part of the plan? Of course not.
Yep.
It could be the stepping stone property. It's okay to get into one because you need to help you leverage into 2 and 3. And then maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10 years, maybe in 15 years, you go, okay, that property has served its purpose. There's now a better use of capital and borrowable equity and borrowing capacity. So we can get rid of that one and recycle that borrowing capacity into something that's more valuable.
Yeah, obviously there you can just see so many moving parts, even in just that one small example in through there. So obviously taking the parts of this that resonate with you the most, you can see there, like from the experience that we've had in kind of working with the clients that we have, most are usually quite surprised that the number of properties required are fewer. It all comes down to what that goal is, and this is why we think that property strategy is so important and so underrepresented within the space. Everyone is thinking about next asset. What does next asset mean? What do I do to get into the next property? Sometimes thinking like one step ahead, which is better than not, but few people really kind of take that overall bigger picture moving forward and go, okay, how do I construct this portfolio overall, understanding where those roadblocks are, taking past experiences to avoid mistakes and try and navigate your way around to get yourself into the best financial position that you possibly can.
And then once we have that, let's make sure that this next purchase fits exactly what we need in our portfolio for us to be able to get there and avoid trying to make mistakes or buying the wrong property that doesn't serve a purpose because we don't want to cop the transaction costs of getting in and out.
Yeah. So in short, number of properties required obviously is down to you. In most instances, it will be fewer than what you need. We're hoping that you've enjoyed this kind of intro to the Property Strategy Podcast series here. Like we mentioned, kind of the next break will be with some of our valued partners that can come through and share their own lens, being industry professionals, experienced investors themselves, to kind of walk you through the good, the bad, and the ugly of their own particular investment philosophy, their own investment strategy, so that we can hopefully deliver you the really good quality content that you need and understand it from the industry professionals to see how they've gone about building and constructing their portfolio, which might be ever-changing as well.
I'm excited, man. I'm excited to hear from our partners and everything they want to build out. Again, if you're listening to this and you want to come on and have a bit of a chat to Joey about building out a portfolio, maybe how you've built your own portfolio or what you like to look for in terms of clients at different stages and what they're going through, then feel free to hit us up because we're always up for a chat.
Absolutely.
But it's going to be good. Going to be good to chat to all the partners.
Yep. So look out for those. Joey at gameplans.com.au if you wanted to jump on the pod. Shameless little plug through there. And yeah, we've absolutely loved delivering this content. Look out for more to come. Geordie, pleasure as always.
Thanks for coming up, mate. Talk to you soon.